Hey, History 7. This is our history video for Wednesday. I have to hold my phone because my printer decided to run out of ink, so I couldn't print the pictures. So I'm going to show you on my computer screen, and unfortunately, Apple apparently doesn't let you flip the camera mid-video, and so you're just stuck seeing my face. I'm very sorry. Very fast. So we'll see how it goes. All right, so this chapter is kind of all about progress and change, and so there's obviously a lot of change in science and technology. We saw some of them last chapter, but we have even more now. There are good things that come out of it, but there are also some negatives. A lot of the advances are made in physics, chemistry, and microbiology. And so we're going to talk about different scientists today, but we're also going to talk about some different inventions that are pretty cool. Some inventions that we still use today, just in different forms. And so it's just kind of interesting. I do have some pictures, and I have one video that I'm going to post underneath this video that you need to watch. It's pretty interesting, like how the telephone works. So, all right, so one of the first people was James Maxwell. He was a Scottish scientist, and he worked in physics and astronomy. He's known as a scientific genius. He actually predicted the existence of radio waves before we even knew what radio waves were. His greatest contribution, though, was in electricity, magnetism, and optics, which is the study of like how light works. And he kind of put all of them together, and Albert Einstein later used his research to kind of help him. So some of these scientists, you're like, oh, so they studied light. You know, what difference does that make? He didn't invent anything, but he helps later scientists. So that's what makes the difference. Then we have Louis Pasteur, and he helped prevent a lot of diseases. For example, he was the one who developed the process of heating milk and other liquids in order to slow the development of disease-causing microbes. So if you think about like milk straight out of a cow, you can actually get pretty sick from it if it's not pasteurized. And so he is the one who came up with that process. It's called pasteurization. Milk is heated, and then it stays better longer. You don't have like bacteria growing in it as quickly, that kind of thing. So that is why his process was really important. He also made a contribution to science, and he said that spontaneous generation, which is the idea that life generated from non-living materials, is a myth. So what he did is he put a mixture of sugar and yeast in a special flask, and he heated it to sterilize it, make sure there were no like bacterium in there. And then air could go in, but it prevented any dust or microbes from coming into contact. And so if you could have spontaneous generation, then some life form would develop in there, but nothing developed. And so he showed that, you know, you can't have just like, you know, a random item and it's not going to just randomly produce life. And that's kind of what he's showing. And that really like pushes against what Darwin and other scientists were saying about evolution. So let's talk about Charles Darwin, okay? Charles Darwin was, sorry, my arm gets tired. Who knew? All right, so Charles Darwin, he was actually born into a Christian family. They had a history of like free thinkers, though. They like to ask questions. He studied medicine, and he just got bored. Like, he just was really bored. He was not into school, and his father actually sent him to Cambridge and wanted him to become a pastor, but he gave up on that. And so what he did is he was a naturalist, which is a scientist all about nature. And so he sailed on the HMS Beagle. And I'm going to give you a little bit more information. While he was on, I think it's the Galapagos Islands, but anyway, he's on these islands and he's watching these birds, they're finches. And he noticed that, like, through a whole bunch of observation, he was very good at noticing things. He noticed that over time, the, is it called a beak on a bird? No. Anyway, you know, like the beak part of a bird. I think it's a beak. Anyway, sorry, having a blonde moment. Well, not a blonde moment because you can see my dark hair, but having a moment here. So he noticed that the finches that had the longer beaks were surviving, and it seemed like more birds were being born with longer beaks. So he said that those birds evolved and changed over time to have longer beaks. There have also been some observations about giraffes that longer necked giraffes, like over time, they have evolved to have longer necks. Now, this is the thing, okay? If you think about giraffes, right, they eat food from really tall trees. So the shorter ones are not going to survive because they can't reach the food. So think about it this way, okay? If you have two parents who are really tall, you have a higher chance of being tall. So think about giraffes, right? If you have two giraffes that are tall and they have a baby, that giraffe is also going to be tall. So over time, yes, the taller ones survive and then they have babies that are tall, but that does not mean that a bird changed eventually into a giraffe, right? Like, I don't know where he got, like, we changed from a different animal to, you know, he forgot some important steps. So yeah, that's true that, like, birds with stronger beaks, the longer ones might survive and might have more, like, might have babies that have bigger beaks because they pass that gene on. But it doesn't mean that the birds evolved from, like, fish or anything. So I don't know. I don't get it, like, why people would believe it, because there's missing pieces. We don't see half animal, half person. You know, we don't see half bird, half fish things happening. So, and the big thing with Darwin is he really struggled with how a good God could design and sustain a world that had pain and suffering. He had a little girl, I think she was like 9 or 10. It says she was 10 and she died, and he just could not get over that. And he just couldn't understand how God created a world that had pain and suffering if he was a good God. And so he really struggled with that. And I think that's why he came up with this idea where we don't need God, because science did it all. Or science shows that God didn't do it. And so he built the foundation for an evolutionary theory. Now, he did not come up with all parts of the theory. It's developed and changed over time, but he did write 2 different things. And he believed that all living things developed from a single life form. They believed that, like, there was a bacteria and that eventually developed into this and that developed into this and that developed until we got humans eventually. And so just kind of crazy, these ideas, because you just don't see that, like I talked about. So he wrote 2 different books, The Origin of Species in 1859 and then The Descent of Man in 1871, like where man is descended from. And the big thing is that scientists after this, a lot of scientists believed him and excluded God and the Bible from consideration as a source of information. And so there is the question of, why do we have death and suffering if we do have a good God? That's a question a lot of people ask, like, I can't follow God because, there are people starving and there are these diseases. And the big thing we have to remember is that that was not intended for this world. We have those because of the fall. And it's because of human sin that we have those problems in our world. So, yeah. So it's just a reminder, that we have those because of that. All right. So, and then there's a lot of changes in technology. And the problem is, though, society kind of came to replace faith in God. And they instead look at science instead of God for answers. And so it just kind of reduces the dependence people have on God. So one of the big changes is transportation. There's quite a few changes there. Britain is the first one who developed the first known railroad. One of the people who actually really pushed for railroads in England was Queen Victoria's husband. His name is Albert. He was very into technology. He wanted change. And I believe she's the first monarch, like reigning monarch, to ride on a train. I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So by they had like short routes at first, and then by the 1840s, they actually had a national network of trains. This is the thing. If you have a canal, it freezes in the winter. So you're just kind of stuck in the winter. And so railroads can go all year, though, and they eventually got to great speeds. It was a reduced cost. It just didn't cost them as much. And so the United States was a little bit behind them, but we do get our first steam locomotives and steel rails, and we actually buy those from Britain. And it helps along the East Coast and then into Chicago, especially. The trains were very important in Chicago. Even today, there's still a lot of trains that go through there. And it actually became a very strategic thing during the Civil War to send supplies and troops in. And then eventually in 1869, we have a transcontinental railroad that goes all the way across. And it was just really important in having people moved west. Another thing is the steamship. Inventors wanted to power ships using this new steam-powered engine. For a while, though, it was kind of funny. Wind-powered ships with the sails were actually faster than the early steamships. It takes time to get your technology going. But then Watt came up with this steam engine that was just faster. It had a lot of improvements, and so steamships got faster and faster. And so steamships started replacing sail-driven ships, and they were able to travel all the way across the ocean. They carried passengers, mail, and other items between Britain and America. That was a huge trade route. Then we have the internal combustion engine, and this produced power inside of the engine. It was powered by gas or diesel. And then we have automobiles develop. Europeans were probably the first to start working on them, but American entrepreneurs really are the ones who kind of made it huge, including Henry Ford, and it just became a huge part of life in the United States. I do have some pictures in case you're like, oh my gosh, she's just gonna talk the whole time. No, I have a couple pictures coming. Okay, so then flight. This had been a dream for a long time. Leonardo da Vinci, like forever ago that we talked about, he actually had in some of his notebooks drawings of flight. They didn't have the technology, obviously, but that was like a dream of his. He knew it was possible, but the first successful one did not even happen in Europe. It happened here in the United States. Most of you guys probably know this by the Wright brothers. They actually started with a bicycle shop and later through studying and through a lot of trials and a lot of failures, were able to do the first successful flight at Kitty Hawk in North Carolina, and they made their first successful flight on December 17th of 1903. I do have a picture. Hopefully you guys can see it. It's hard to position the phone correctly. All right, so you guys can see that. Looks totally safe, doesn't it? You're just laying on top. See the little man there laying on the top? Yeah, not a plane that I would want to ride in personally, but you know. So that's a huge change for transportation. Obviously, they need some more improvements before they can start taking a whole bunch of passengers and stuff. But, you know, they kind of developed that and it, you know, kept going and going and going. It's kind of like a lot of these inventions, because of these people, we have things that we use all the time now, like Henry Ford. Look at all the cars we drive now. Flight. Look at the planes we use and how much we use planes, except for, you know, not right now necessarily, but normally we use planes, you know, for everything everywhere. So another one that made a difference back then and today is obviously the telegraph and the telephone. It made global communication a possibility. Messages that took, can you imagine the change? It would take days and sometimes weeks to deliver a message could now be transmitted within minutes or even seconds. Think about like the change that would bring about like in war. You know, think about like a general needs more troops. It takes 2 weeks for him to get troops. They already lost the battle. But if you can send it in like in seconds, you might have troops next day. And so it just makes a rapid response. Demands could be made. And the only problem is that sometimes, even think about like texting, you know, somebody says something, you get mad and you send off a text right away. You know, you can't think through your answer. So like letters sometimes are more effective in that you can think through your answer. So anyway, so the telegraph is one of the first ones. It enabled people to write messages to others who lived far away, so you could send like a quick little message. Operators sent the first messages over wire lines using a code that was developed by Samuel Morse. You might be wondering, whoa, is Miss Morse related to him? Yes, not technically blood related because of an adoption in there, but I am related to him, so pretty cool. And him and his assistant came up with this code, and he's the one who actually patented the first known machine that would send these coded messages. So I have a picture of it here. And so you would use this part. Is that that part? You would use it and you would push it down, and it would send dots and dashes, and then you would have to be able to decode the actual Morse code, which is pretty cool. I think it's actually down here. You hit it. You push this, maybe. See, I'm horrible. I would not be able to do. Obviously, I did not study Samuel Morse very well. I mean, his, like, invention. So, I'm not a scientist, so, yeah, I just don't remember which end you would use. I don't know. Anyway, sorry. So, they would send coded messages. Now, you have to have it connected by wires. It's not like today where we have our cell phones and we can do what we want and it's not connected by anything. And so they had to set up telegraph lines all across the country, all the way to the West Coast. And so that made a huge difference in the Civil War because that was right at the beginning of the Civil War that they had this. And so that made a huge difference that they could send messages back and forth right away. And they do have more developments that are made. And then in 1866, what they did is they laid the first successful telegraph cable all across the Atlantic Ocean. So what they did is they have, and I have a picture of one of the ships. They had 2 boats. You can see, like, look at all that cable. They had 2 ships, one left from here, one left from over there, and they met in the middle and then worked to splice it together. And so they laid it, the first one, they, like, sent a message and then it snapped, and then they had to do it again, but then it was successful. And it enabled operators to send messages all the way across the ocean to Europe, which, if you can imagine, that was a huge feat. And then later, Britain actually sets one up to India. They used a submarine, which is pretty cool. And so they could send messages all around the world by the time that was done. And here's a picture of the cable as well. It's super huge. It's thick. It's hard to tell, obviously, in the computer, but it's pretty thick because there's a lot of pressure, obviously, in the ocean. And so they had to make sure it was thick enough to survive. So just pretty impressive. A lot of cool inventions. So because we have the telegraph, we can have more inventions. And one of those is the telephone. And so men worked to develop the technology that resulted in the telephone. And the first one, though, that was like successful was Alexander Graham Bell. He was the first one to patent it. That's the smartest thing. Like, if you come up with an invention, you got to sign up for a patent, because if somebody else comes up with it like a day later, but they get the patent first, they are technically credited. And so Thomas Edison actually helped him to improve it. Edison lost a lot of his hearing as a child, and so when he first tried to use the telephone, he could not hear anything or couldn't understand what he was hearing, and so he made improvements so that way it was clearer, and you could hear the call clearer. And I have a picture of him. This is Alexander Graham Bell, and you can kind of see that, so it's just kind of cool because, you know, if they hadn't come up with their inventions, we wouldn't have any of what we have today. Think about like our phones, which I'm recording this video on. So yeah, it just made a huge difference in life back then. And so make sure you send me the code word. And also I'm going to include a video on how the telephone works. It's pretty interesting. So make sure you watch that as well. Don't forget code word, watch the other video, and I will see you guys on Friday. It looks like we're almost done with this chapter. We are. So we're gonna have a test next week. A test, you know, one of our weird tests. I hope you guys are doing well, and I miss seeing you all in class. And if you ever have a question about history, you can always send it to me too. So send me it and I will maybe answer it on the next video. So I will see you guys on Friday. Bye.